Good evening. Welcome to HSLDA's CAP training for our recess training, as it were. We are really looking forward to you guys being here tonight. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Joel Gruey. I am the Executive Director of HSLDA Action. With me tonight is Maggie McNeely. She is our lobbyist in DC and the resident master and expert on all things about how Congress works, or more often does not work in this case. That being said, we're going to cover a couple things tonight. I want to give you a short version of the schedule for this evening. After a bit of an introduction I have for you guys about why this matters, we're going to go through what lobbying looks like at home in your home district, as well as some of the issues that we're currently considering and watching in DC. And then we're going to actually open up a chance for you guys to ask questions at the end. So we'll have a bit of time for Q&A. There was a desire last time we did one of these to have that, and so we wanted to make sure that was incorporated as part of the program. If you're interested in recording this afterwards, we're going to try and send that out afterwards, as well as any materials we provide or reference during the production. We'll be able to send those to you guys later. That being said, if you are not a member of HSLDA Action already and you're joining us, we're so glad you're here. We'd love for you to join and be part of what we do. We'd also love for you to be invested in what we do for the Congressional Action Program, and I'll explain that in a minute. That being said, HSLDA Action is essentially the sister organization to Homeschool Legal Defense Association. HSLDA has been around for a long time, since 1983, and basically was the vehicle that helped advance homeschool freedom all across America. HSLDA Action exists essentially as a sister organization to that, and specifically works on the federal lobbying and policy sides of homeschool freedom, as well as some of the political education and activism that's involved in what it takes to keep homeschooling free. Now, I've referenced freedom a couple times here because that is essentially what we're about, and it's really important. So I want to talk about that for a second. If you're familiar with history, you may have stumbled into a character, a United States Secretary of State, a guy named George Shultz. He's most probably famous for a particular quote, and that is that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance and the willingness to act in its defense. It's kind of highfalutin sounding, to be fair, but it's a relatively simple truth when you boil it down. And it's forgotten all too often. And it's why homeschool parents, we must teach the principles of good citizenship and civic engagement to our sons and daughters. It is honestly a tragedy of our time that our societies become so distanced from how our government actually works that much of our society lack the basic knowledge necessary to impact the political process or even be a good citizen. At HSLDA Action, we don't want that to be the case for you guys. We don't want that to be the case for homeschooling. And so we work to educate in that area. However, the contrast to that is a research piece put out by the University of Pennsylvania a few years ago that said, according to one of their surveys, only 30% of the respondents knew that the Senate actually alone confirmed Supreme Court nominees. Maybe that's better now. I wouldn't hold my hopes up. Only 32% of Americans could name all three branches of government. Only 37% could name any of the rights under the First Amendment. I won't ask you what your answers to that are. Nonetheless, it demonstrates a problem. And I see it, frankly, as a failure of our country's public education system, that the most effective political action a student can conceive of these days is often a protest or riot in the streets. When young people don't believe they can have an effective voice in the political process, is it really surprising that what follows is disengagement, disenfranchisement, and eventually disregard for systems of government that safeguard our freedoms? Sadly, the prevailing assumptions today are that the next generation is neither capable of being effective in politics or able to positively impact the political arena. I think both assumptions are utterly false. The impact of educated, hardworking, civically equipped young men and women is honestly tough to overstate. Furthermore, they'll learn it from you, and they need to. Secretary Shultz's words ring true. As it is always the case in a democratic republic, the freedoms that we hold dear hang in the balance. So as homeschooling advocates and parents, we need to start thinking about opportunities to teach good citizenship and civic engagement to our children, just as we mobilize to secure our freedoms for the next generation. The vision of HSLDA's Congressional Action Program is and must be higher and longer than just the next congressional election, the next committee vote, or the next legislative issue. Those are all important, but we're missing the forest for the trees when we focus there. We are building a model for the next generation of home educators of what effective engagement looks like and equipping them with what they need to rightly judge ideas and their consequences. Furthermore, we're doing that while we advocate for robust freedom to homeschool. And when I say robust, I use that for a reason. We are not merely settling for tolerance of home education, or home education tied down or tied to government largeness. No, no, no. The freedom that we are striving to defend is the unique innovation and capacity of each parent in guiding their own child. This approach gives us the maximum flexibility to tailor the education to the needs the needs of the child, the abilities of the student and the teacher, and the maximum ability of each family. Homeschooling succeeds because we are free and because government is limited. Now, over the past 3 years of COVID, we've seen the institutions of our nation tested, particularly our public education system. Actually, our education systems writ large. Of the 3 broad choices, only one proved resilient across our entire nation. That was homeschooling. When our nation was tested, the prevailing systems were shuttered and closed, and homeschool families just kept chugging away. Mildly to the annoyance of my children, nonetheless, COVID didn't really disrupt their learning. Okay? In fact, this happened all across America, and the appeal of homeschooling has grown, attracting families no matter their income bracket, their racial or ethnic affinity, culture, or political stripe. The homeschooling community is the most diverse and representative it has ever been, and it is strong. Now, I have 3 boys, as I just mentioned. Although the pandemic affected them, I've seen no loss of learning that people are talking about today. In fact, they've made great strides, and that is a rather common story across America. It's also what I believe keeps the new surge of home education intact. I was studying the process at HSLD over the last several years, and we saw a significant rise in homeschooling. And although there was some retrenchment after schools reopened, it was nowhere near what was expected. In fact, it seems to have stabilized at a much higher level. There has been a sea change in basically what choices people make in education across America. Families see it. They've now tried it. And they now found homeschooling more manageable than expected, but better as a whole. That is the solution we advocate for. Okay, we work to preserve the innovative freedom that makes homeschooling the success it is and allowed home education to weather a trial the world went through, and we came out stronger. HSLD Action is committed to helping you spread that story of success. Homeschooling works. Homeschooling lets children and families thrive. And when the government decides in its infinite wisdom that it thinks it knows better, we can point to their attempts at better over the past 3 years and call them on their hypocrisy. Home education has plenty of opponents. They spring up over and over like creatures of myth, but with the same old story. They, in their unfathomable wisdom, know better for your children than you do as their loving parents. And you are the answer to that attack. The Congressional Action Program, a part of HSLD Action, is designed to help place you in a position where the evidence of home education success is known personally by members of our Congress, both in D.C. when we need to lobby for or stand against a particular piece of legislation, or across America at home, in each of the representatives' districts, home districts, where you live and work, where they come back to see the people that they purport to represent. So what does the Congressional Action Program look like today? Well, honestly, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about some issues, and we're going to talk about how to lobby, because you aren't in D.C. right now, okay? That's great. It's good. And frankly, it's probably healthy for you. It's not necessarily a great place to be sometimes, but it's a necessary one to have a presence in. But honestly, you, wherever you live, need to have a working relationship with your elected officials in general, politicians, because frankly, they're much less likely to regulate something if it's going to hurt people they know. So build relationships with them. Go to their barbecues or events. Invite them to a co-op or attend your local party meeting. It would be much easier, frankly, if freedoms could be won like trophies and stored on a shelf, but freedom, particularly in our country, does not work that way. It's elusive, it's costly, and it's frankly fairly easy to lose. But for the good of our families and our children's future, we believe the journey to preserve our freedom is very much worth it. That being said, I'd like to turn it over actually to Maggie now to kind of give you a crash course in what lobbying looks like at the home, kind of at the basic level, because frankly, the best lobbying and advocacy for home education happens with electeds where they live, where they're from. And we at HSLD Action want to equip you with how to do that. And then we want to walk you through some of the current issues that are frankly major players and pieces that are happening in Congress and in legislation today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maggie.
Thank you so much, Joel. As Joel mentioned, my name is Maggie McNeely. I do all of the lobbying and federal relations for HSLDA Action. So I live full-time in Washington, D.C., and I deal with congressmen when they are on Capitol Hill. But you don't live in D.C. You live in the districts. You get a unique opportunity to interact with congressmen when they are at home. So I'm going to introduce you to what is lobbying, give you a crash course in how to lobby, and give you all the tools that you need to feel confident when you meet with your legislators and talk about the issues that really matter to you. So first, what is lobbying? When I tell people in D.C. that I'm a lobbyist, no one really thinks anything about it because they know so many lobbyists and they know what they do, and it's totally normal. When I tell people outside of D.C. that I lobby, I get all sorts of strange looks because lobbying often has a negative connotation. I think a lot of us think of people passing stacks of dollar bills across the tables of legislators to try and buy off their votes. And I'm not going to say that those lobbyists don't exist, because they definitely do. But really, all lobbying is trying to influence public policy. if you're a concerned citizen, there's a good chance that you have done lobbying at some point in your life. If you've ever sent an email, if you've ever posted a political post on social media, if you've ever signed a petition, you have lobbied. But the best form of lobbying is actually face-to-face, which brings us to why we're doing this training right now, tonight, in the middle of July. And that is because all of your congressmen are about to leave D.C. for the entire month of August and go to their districts. Now, typically throughout the year, they sporadically split their time between D.C. and the districts, and it's kind of hard to know when they're at which office. But you're guaranteed that during August and a couple of weeks in September, they are not in D.C. and they are at home in the districts, which gives you the golden opportunity to meet with them at home, to have those face-to-face lobby meetings with them without having to make the trek to Capitol Hill itself. So let's go into Lobbying 101 so that this is not a foreign concept to you and you can feel confident to go and do these face-to-face visits with your congressman. Step number 1 is to set up your meeting. Although the real step number 1 is to know who your congressman is. And I'm going to assume that most of you do know that, but there have been a lot of districts that have been redrawn this year. So if you don't know, you can go to congress.gov/members, and there's a really helpful tool. You just plug in your zip code, and it'll tell you who all of your representatives and your senators are, and then all of their office information. It's a great tool, super helpful. So once you know who your congressman is, you're going to make an appointment at the district office. Now, some district offices do have a walk-in policy, but it's just common courtesy to go ahead and make an appointment. And that's also going to guarantee that there's actually someone available to meet with you. So if you just walk in, they may not have time in their schedule to meet with you right there and then. So you actually want to make an appointment. Now, most websites do have a meeting request form that you're going to have to fill out. And they're going to ask who is going to attend the meeting, what issues do you want to discuss. And they really want you to fill out that form because they want it for their records. Being government officials, they like lots of records. So you do want to do that. But since this is a district office and not the D.C. office, to increase your chance of actually meeting with your congressman themselves and not just a staff person, I suggest also going ahead and calling the office to try and set up a meeting. That's not going to guarantee that you actually get to meet with the elected official, but it will increase the chances of that. Just to kind of work your way through the system to actually talk to someone physically on the phone is going to help with that. So once you get your meeting set up, step number 2 is you want to actually prepare for the meeting. You don't want to just show up and just really have no idea what you're talking about and don't know who you're meeting with. The person you're meeting with is very busy and they don't want to feel like you're wasting their time. And you don't want to waste your time either. So you want to be really prepared. So first thing you want to do is know what you're actually going to talk about. Now, you may have an entire laundry list of complaints you want your congressman to know that you have, and you want to talk about all of those things in this rare meeting that you're having with them. Don't do that. Don't talk about more than 2 topics, preferably just 1 topic, but no more than 2, because these meetings are usually slotted for about 15 to 20 minutes, which may sound like a lot of time, but it's really not a lot of time. So pick 1 to 2 topics that you really care a lot about and focus on those. Now, you don't need to be an expert on any of those topics because you are just a citizen. You probably don't work for a think tank. This is probably not your full-time job talking about whatever this policy issue is. So you don't have to know everything. But you can be pretty well informed even as just a constituent. And you also probably have a personal stake in whatever the issue this is. If you're a homeschool parent, we're going to be talking about a couple of homeschooling issues later on after this section. So you can talk about how this affects you as a homeschooling family, as a homeschooling parent. Another thing you want to do, aside from just knowing the facts of the issue, is brainstorm possible questions that the legislator or the staff person is going to ask you. One question that I get, no matter what I'm meeting about, every single time the legislator, the staff person will ask, well, how many homeschoolers live in my district? Because if they are solving an issue or they're being asked to implement a policy, they want to know how many of their constituents that this actually affects. If it's just affecting 1 or 2 people, they're probably not going to care. But they like having cold, hard facts. So try and anticipate questions like that and have answers ready. You also want to research any opposition to the issue you're talking about. because chances are the legislator or the staff member is going to ask about that as well. Or they may already be on the opposing side, and so you need to anticipate any arguments that they're going to bring up, so you're not caught completely off guard. Now, you also want to research the person that you're meeting with. Now, this may not be possible. You may not know who you're meeting with, but when you set up the meeting, they might tell you that you're actually going to get to meet with your congressperson, or they're going to give you the name of the staff person you're meeting with. So if that happens, you want to do research. One of the best ways to do this is to use LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great tool. This is why it was set up. It's not for you're not a stalker. I promise. The people you're meeting with are going to have expected you to research them, and they will probably have looked into you as well. And the reason for this is they are also going to be prepared for the meeting. They want to know what part of the issue you're coming from, and that's what you want to know from them as well. That's going to help you anticipate some of those questions that are going to come up, to know what their background is. But the most important part about researching the person is that the thing that makes lobbying most effective is when you can establish a relationship with the person that you're meeting with. And this is especially true when you're meeting at a district office, because a lot of times staff members on Capitol Hill are not actually from the district that their legislator that they're working for is from. But at a district office, almost all the time, the staff members there are actually from the district. So there's a very good chance that you have a lot in common with them. Maybe you went to the same college. Maybe you have the same favorite sports team. So if you find out those things, you can immediately latch onto that, so that when you meet them, you can talk about those things. You can use that as an icebreaker and really start to develop a relationship. Just a quick story. I was with a coworker. We were doing meetings on Capitol Hill, and we had a meeting with an office we knew was on the opposite side of the issue we wanted to talk about. But we walked in, and the staff member we were meeting with, his phone case had the same team that my coworker, it's his favorite football team as well. And so my coworker was like, "Oh my gosh, I love that football team." And they got off on this long rant about how much they love this football team and all the history and such. And we had gone in thinking that this office wasn't going to give us the time of day, because they already had an opinion that was totally opposite of ours. But after they had this great conversation about their shared love for this football team, we actually had a really great long meeting. The staffer heard all of our points, really engaged with us. And I doubt we persuaded them, but we established a really good relationship, and they at least understood where we were coming from. So that's really important, to be prepared. Research the person, research your facts. So now that you are prepared for the actual meeting, step number 3 is the meeting itself. Now, like I said, you might know who you're meeting with beforehand, but you might not. So when you get to the meeting, if you're meeting with your congressman, that's great, because then you're guaranteed that they're actually going to hear your issue. But don't be disappointed if you're just meeting with a staff person, for a couple of reasons. Staff are actually much more knowledgeable about the issue you're talking about. They're the experts in the office, not the legislators. It's the staff who write policy and direct policy. So if you're meeting with the staff person, that's actually very helpful. But there is a con to that. Staff members are also the gatekeepers. If you come to them with a policy and they decide that either they don't like you didn't do a good job of establishing that relationship, or they're not interested in the policy, the congressman will never hear about it, and vice versa as well. If they think the policy is really interesting, they can move it up the chain and make it a priority for the congressman. So just be aware with staff people that is a real thing. First part of the meeting, when you're in the actual meeting, is you just want to introduce yourself. Be yourself. Talk about your connection to the district. Try and establish that relationship with the person you're meeting with. Just be friendly. Again, you are a private citizen. You're not coming in here as an expert. This is kind of a casual meeting for you, even though you do really care. Just relax. This is not a high pressure thing for you. But don't spend too much time, because again, staffers are very busy people. This meeting wasn't allotted a lot of time, so you want to dive into whatever it is you came to talk about. Now, you want to aim for about 3 to 4 minutes for whatever the topic is. So you want to be really informative, and you don't want to ramble. Again, you're short on time. You don't want to waste anyone else's time. You want to stay on topic. If you have any personal stories connected to the actual issue, that's really helpful too, in addition to all of the facts and research that you did in preparation for your meeting. Now, in the meeting, the person you're meeting with might disagree with you. They might push back a little bit on what you're talking about. If that happens, don't get angry, don't get upset, defend your position, but don't become overly argumentative. You want to be a cheerful warrior. Heated debates with staff members are almost never persuasive. It just makes them not like you. And that comes back to that gatekeeper thing. If you leave a bad impression, the people who matter, the legislators, the congressmen, won't ever hear about your issue. Even if you don't change their minds, you want to leave the impression of, wow, those homeschool people were actually really nice and they made really good points and they were interesting. And I didn't really agree with them, but I wouldn't mind meeting with them again in the future. You want to end on a positive note, even if you didn't agree. And if they have questions, and they probably will have questions, and you don't know the answers because, again, you're not an expert, it's totally okay to say, I don't know. You can say, I don't know, I will find out and email you later. That's totally acceptable. They understand that you're not an expert and you're not going to know everything. And a nice part of being part of the CAT program is if they do have a question that you don't have the answer to, you can email me, you can email one of the other HSLDA Action people, and we will do our best to find an answer to the questions that you don't know in the middle of that meeting. At the very end of the meeting, this is very important, you want to make your ask. This is the entire point of the meeting. If you don't actually have something that you want the congressional office to do, it was a waste of everyone's time, because you're presenting the congressman with a problem, and now you need to tell them how they can fix it or what they can do to address the problem. So sometimes this is, please support Bill X, Y, and Z, or please don't vote for any bills that do this. Always have an ask. Always have a point to the meeting that you end with. Congressmen really like action items, and they're really going to appreciate this. Now, after the meeting, there's one more step, and that is the meeting follow-up. Also very important, almost as important as the ask. What the meeting follow-up is going to be probably an email to whoever you met with any materials that you promised you were going to send them, any answers to questions that you couldn't answer in the meeting, but also just a thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your day to meet with me. Thank you so much for listening to what we had to say and listening to this issue that we brought to you. Very, very important. And this also goes back to building that relationship with the person that you're meeting with. Because another thing the email follow-up does is it makes sure that they have your contact info and you have their contact info. And you can also feel free to use this going forward. If you ever see any news articles about the issue that you talked about, you can feel free to send that staffer that news article. Say, hey, look, I saw this. I thought you might be interested. It's related to that thing we met with. And what this is going to do is maintain that relationship. Keep you and your issue in the mind of that staff person or that legislator, so that whenever anything comes up related to that topic, or maybe when anything comes up related to homeschooling, they will think of you as a resource. And this is especially important in district offices because you do all live in the same area, that you can maintain that local connection with your legislator. Okay, I know that was a lot, and you probably have questions, but as Joel said, we have a Q&A session at the end. So I am just going to dive in to the next part, which is two of our top issues that we're dealing with at the federal level right now that you can bring to your congresspeople. Now, the number one issue that you have probably heard quite a bit about since the age of COVID is the issue of education financing. Because now that, during the age of COVID, everyone sought out public school alternatives, and a huge number of people who are now homeschooling or private schooling or doing things that aren't public school. And there's a lot of families who this is a great financial burden for them. And congressmen hear about this all the time, and they're trying to figure out different ways that they can relieve this financial burden to help people who don't want to go to public school, help them to finance these other options. There's a lot of bad ways to do this, but there are also some good alternatives. So the bad ways are ones that you hear a lot about at the state level and that our lawyers at HSLDA are dealing with on a very regular basis. One of those is called an education savings account. Now, what this is, yes, so on the screen here, you'll see what's called a one-pager. And a one-pager is just a one-page sheet with all of the facts and information relevant to an issue. And we are actually going to be emailing this out to you after the recording or the webinar, so that you will have this for your own use. Very helpful. We do this for all of our issues. Anyway, so yes, this is our one-pager. So education savings accounts are what they take a little bit of a different form in different states, but basically it's the tax dollars that you pay for public schools, but instead of going directly to public schools, they can now sort of be used for other education alternatives. The problem with this is that once you pay into the tax system, that money is no longer yours. The government now has the right to say what those tax dollars can be spent on. So if this were to be used for homeschooling, the government can say, well, you can use those dollars on this type of curriculum, but you can't use it on this type of curriculum because there's no such thing as federal dollars that come without strings attached. Another popular scheme that's similar to this is money follows the child. You'll hear that term a lot as well. These are both types of bills that have been introduced at the federal level that we do not support and we actively lobby against. But whenever you don't support something, you want to make sure you have a positive alternative because congressmen really are trying very hard to support school choice alternatives, public school alternatives. And so when you tell them that we don't support X, Y, and Z, you want to be able to come in and say, but we do support these things and you can do this instead so that you can still say that you're doing something to help the kids who don't want to go to public school. One of those things are 529 savings accounts. Now, currently, students can use 529 accounts for any K through 12 expenses that aren't homeschooling. Now, 529 account is just a tax-advantaged savings account. It is your own money that you can use at your own discretion for certain education expenses. But like I said, homeschoolers are specifically exempt from that at the moment. We've been working to fix that, and it hasn't happened yet. So you can encourage your congressman to work for that reform. Other options are tax deductions. Currently, public school teachers and private school teachers can actually deduct their school materials and such from their taxes as a tax deduction. But homeschool parents are not considered eligible home educators, eligible teachers for this tax deduction. So we can get that loophole fixed as well. Tax credits are another good option. It's just you getting a tax credit for donating to a nonprofit organization or something like that. So you have more of your own money to spend on whatever education materials you would like. So like I said, all of that is on this one pager that you will be receiving after this, but that is a great topic to take to your legislators because some of them understand this issue that federal dollars come with strings attached, and we don't want that in the homeschool world because homeschool works best when it's free, but many legislators don't understand that yet. So that is something we are working on and would love your help as you go and lobby your legislators at home. Another issue that is brand new to us, and so brand new that I don't actually have a one-pager for you yet, but will soon in the future, is the issue of homeschool military pro gear. Now, I'm sure some of you are actually military families yourselves, or you're connected to the military, and if so, you are intimately familiar with this issue, which means you're probably also aware there's a lot of technical terms to go with this issue that I'm not going to use because I don't want to misuse them. So please forgive me if I'm not saying things as you would probably say them. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. But the issue is, for those of you who aren't military families, is when a military family is moved, they're allowed to bring only a certain weight allowance of household goods with them. But they can deduct what is known as professional gear from that weight allowance. It's also known as pro gear. Pro gear is what is considered materials necessary to do a job that you can't just repurchase in whatever location you've moved to. So this could be specialized work clothing, instruction manuals, specific tools or equipment. All of that can be deducted from the allowance you're allowed to take with you. Now, the issue at hand is homeschooling materials are specifically exempt from the Pro Gear allowance. Now, the issue is many spouses are the homeschool parents, and that is what they do. And when you think of desks and homeschool curriculum and all of the materials that go into homeschooling, that adds up really quickly. And that was all very difficult to purchase the first time. Imagine having to purchase it every single time because it doesn't fit into your military weight allowance because it's not considered professional gear that you need to do your job. So we are seeking a federal fix for this because it is the military and not a state issue. We would like to see homeschool material be considered pro gear to really make this easier for military families, because as more and more military families choose to homeschool, this is really becoming a real issue, and we would like to lessen that burden on them. So that's another issue you can bring to your legislators, specifically if you are military and have some experience with that issue. Okay, well, that was the issue rundown. Imagine we can go to Q&A as Q&A now. Okay.
Let me see if we've got anything here. I did have one question I wanted to ask you while I open this up. Specifically with the, I don't think I wanted to go back to your kind of discussion on the meetings with the legislators themselves, the in-person thing. One of the issues I think one of the discussions that we hear sometimes is people like, does it really matter? Mm-hmm. If I actually show up, does it count? It's not like they see what I say on social media or they respond to my emails or when I tweet at them, whatever. How much weight is given to actually showing up and having a meeting relative to those offices? Can you address that?
Absolutely. It is so much more important because when you send an email or a phone call, it goes into the system. Like they see that you did those things, but they get hundreds and thousands of those every single week. But when someone actually comes in and meets in person, that's a whole nother amount of effort that they just almost never see, and they will actually remember. So it is absolutely the most important, most influential form of lobbying, for sure.
All right. The next question we have coming in, I think I'll try and take a stab at that, but I'd like you to jump in on this. It is simply, what is CAP? HSLDA's Congressional Action Program, or CAP, CAP. CAP program is essentially a grassroots advocacy component of what HSLDA does. And we invite families, homeschool families, to be essentially a response group, that when we have issues that Maggie or our team flags as being problematic legislatively or positive, for example, if we saw the fix to the pro issue, where we could say, hey, everyone involved in this, we'll send you out a message, go meet with your congressmen, go meet with their staffers, tell them that this is really good or tell them this is really bad and would be dangerous to us. And advocate for us. Now, we do this in two ways. Part of it is what we're doing right here, where we're teaching you what this looks like to engage at the district level. Part of this also is done in DC, because sometimes showing up at their office, particularly if you come from an area that is not right next to DC, it gets noticed. I remember I originally grew up in Washington State. And so Washington State, particularly if you're not Seattle, but out in more of the farm country, if you show up at one of the congressional offices and you're from the hometown, well, let's just say the folks from the hometown don't show up very often. And the red carpet was rolled out for that experience because they were very interested in hearing from someone who would actually bother to come out and see them in person. That being said, what else is there anything else you want to add to what is CAP?
No, I think that pretty well covered it. It's very helpful to have a presence of HSLDA in all of the districts. I cover the DC issue, but I'm just one person, and it is just amazingly helpful to have all of these parents meeting with their legislators back home in the state. Because it's one thing if they hear from me in DC, but then when they go home and they hear about the same issue from people who it actually affects, really makes a huge difference on these issues.
All right, we've got another question here, and this is a good one. It was actually something we were talking about with some congressional staff a couple weeks ago. How is the tax credit idea, or the advantage, I think they say advantage, but I'm assuming they're talking about the 529 accounts. How is that not also subject to government scrutiny? And I'm gonna add on to this question because, to be fair, it is, as a rule, when we say strings are attached to government money, that's not necessarily always bad in the sense that government money or public money should have accountability, right? And that kind of is assumed, but that creates some eccentricities at a certain point. So in this case, how is the tax credit better than, say, kind of a voucher or something like that? Like, what's the difference in that?
So a 529 account is just a regular savings account. Like, you put your money in the account and you take the money back out of the account. But it is tax advantaged because you're only taking it out for certain types of expenses. Now, an education savings account is not a true savings account. Like, it's a very misleading name. What it is tax dollars. It's the tax you're required to pay for the public education system. And then the government coming in and saying, well, we might not necessarily be spending those tax dollars on the public schools. We can now spend them on private schools or other education expenses that you have. But it's not really your dollars anymore once it becomes taxes. It's not a savings account. It's taxes you've paid that the government is redistributing how they see fit. They're saying you have choice to how those dollars are spent, but it's not the same as a true savings account.
The contrary to that is the tax credit, where if you've done your taxes, and I'm sorry for everyone then, having done that, and myself far too much, the money never leaves your hands, and therefore it doesn't get attached to the government regulation that goes along with that, because the distance there is that since it never left you, that it's still within a much higher level of control. So short of your standard IRS audit of a tax form, it doesn't go through the extra level of scrutinies. For example, a health savings account where you have to prove that, hey, I have to give all the receipts and show all the different stuff. It's a credit. The money never left. It didn't go there, and it doesn't have that same sort of scrutiny or kind of accountability systems that are built into that. And you're frankly a lot more free with it. So I hope that's helpful. All right, next question. How do I set up a meeting with with my congresswoman or congressman? Is it easy for a person to meet a member of Congress? Is this a challenging thing?
So this does vary on the member. Some members are very eager to meet constituents, especially in their districts. Other members are less so. No matter who your congressperson is, though, you will have to fill out the form on your congressperson's website. There is a meeting request form. That's almost always what it's called. And you will say, I want to meet on usually a range of dates. They usually ask, what dates you're available. And they'll also ask what issues you want to talk about, who's going to be attending the meeting with you. And so you will submit that form. But as I mentioned, with a district office, in addition to filling out that form, you can also try and call. If you call and actually connect with the scheduler, the office scheduler, you have a higher chance of meeting with the congressperson and not a staff person. It's not a guarantee, but it will increase the likelihood because it just shows that you're really interested and you're actually getting personal contact with the scheduler themselves. And the scheduler is who controls the congressperson's schedule.
All right. Can I a follow-up question to you on that? Let's say we set it up and we're going to have the meeting. Should I bring my kids? One. Is there any rules as far as how that interaction goes? And on the flip side, if we wanted to show them what homeschooling looks like, how would we invite a congressman to come see our co-op or see what we actually do? Is that an appropriate thing to do, or does it all have to be going toward them?
That is a great question. Yes, if you're a homeschooling family okay, let me couch this a little bit. For the CAP program, if you're a homeschooling parent and you really want to go in and talk about the nitty-gritty details of a policy, and you have a kid who is articulate and can also contribute to that, absolutely bring them. If you are a homeschooling family and your kids are kind of all over the place, I don't know. I'll leave that up to your judgment if you want to bring them. It is often helpful to show congresspeople homeschooling families are articulate and can talk about issues and are actually social and contributing members of the society. Because there are certainly congressmen out there who still have this archaic idea that homeschoolers don't know how to socialize with other people. So it is a great opportunity to show that is not true, and that these kids are actually super smart and know what they're talking about and can talk about difficult political subjects like this. So it is a good idea, but you know your kids. If you believe that they can handle themselves in that setting, absolutely bring them. As far as the co-op situation, it's not something that you can't do. Like if you wanted to invite a congressman maybe to come and talk about civics or campaigning or elections or something like that, that's probably a great idea, because then the kids can learn from the congressperson themselves, as well as getting the congressperson to see what a homeschool co-op is like, because many of them have never seen one have kind of heard about it, especially now in this era of COVID, but they really have no idea what they are. So that'd probably be a great opportunity for them.
All right. So I've got 2 more questions. Switching back over to the pro issue for a second, for the pro gear. Can we explain a little bit why homeschool supplies should not be treated like household supplies? A little bit more, like, why isn't it just like other stuff in my house?
Sure. So the pro gear, many times the military member has their own pro gear allowance, and then there is a spouse military pro gear allowance. Because a lot of times the spouse may have they have a separate job that requires materials that they need for their job. In a homeschooling situation, sometimes the spouse is a full-time homeschool parent. That is their job. And so they may have lab kits, or they may have all sorts of technical gear that they use for homeschooling. And that's not stuff they want to repurchase, especially if they have more than one kid they're trying to homeschool and they want to use it for multiple years. That's their job. That should be considered professional gear. It's not the same as just the kitchen table. Does that make sense?
I think my wife would very much appreciate that comment because I think she really feels that. The professional gear involved in this, there's a lot of books.
Yeah.
There's a lot of content. It kind of overflows my... And yes, they are, particularly when you start stacking up.
Yeah.
And when you're on a weight allowance of this is how much you can carry, that science textbook or those 3 science textbooks start adding up really fast. All right, fair enough. Now, okay, going back to that, the conversation with the congressman, one of the things you talked about was kind of anticipating what some of the objections might be or kind of the counter arguments. Are there common objections to kind of our approach to education financing, our kind of idea of tax credits, that they would come in, and how would we respond to those? Can you kind of unpack that a little bit?
Some of them will say that there aren't actually strings we need to worry about. This is what I've heard the most often, is that it's just government trying to keep track of where the money is going, like Joel mentioned earlier. And that's a totally legitimate comment. However, homeschooling is what it is because it does not have the same regulations that are placed on it as the private schools, as other options are. And because there are so many different ways to homeschool, so many types of curriculums and programs, that it's going to be nearly impossible for a government bureaucrat to know which of that massive list of options are acceptable for spending these dollars on. Just the amount of oversight that would be required to make sure that no legitimate piece of curriculum is left off of what's acceptable is just, it's a lot to ask of the government. And just it's just fraught with regulations on homeschooling that we don't want, would not be helpful at all.
It's like we're making the case that the government is neither omniscient nor has an unlimited amount of resources, which I
know it's crazy, right?
Funny thing that, yeah, it really is. Okay, so there is that aspect to it, and there's a logistical piece to that, and people are like, well, we'd only do that if there was, I don't know, an issue or a concern. I guess the question, maybe the other question that would go along with that is there any particular objection to doing a credit versus, say, a voucher where you get that money from the government to use versus just keeping more of it? How do we land on that one? Where's the arguments?
Well, so again, a voucher is the government being able to say what you can spend that money on. It is saying what is and isn't appropriate for your homeschooling program. Whereas a tax credit is just you getting to keep more of your money to spend as you see fit and what would be best for your family and your children and your educational needs.
All right. So next question. Setting up a meeting with a congressional office is not the only way to meet a congressman. They tend to go and do things and go out in public and occasionally interact with people. Sometimes, some of them less so than others, some of them lots more. If we have that moment where we have a chance to encounter them briefly, it's like you've got 3 minutes to have a conversation. It's like you and Congressman so-and-so are at the state fair or at whatever event is, and it's you suddenly realize that you have a moment with them before they have to go away and you have to go away, and you have 60 seconds, a little less. What if you were trying to boil it down to a very short message, or an unplanned meeting? Is there kind of a ready access? Here's what I would always try and leave a congressman with if I want to talk about homeschooling when I bump into them. So I'm catching you flat-footed. This wasn't one of the ones we thought about before.
Oh gosh, I probably emphasize to them that homeschooling is a great option, and our family really appreciates the freedom of being able to do that and to tailor education to our family's needs and what works best for our children, and not having to deal with the burdensome regulations that many other education alternatives have, and we would appreciate the congressman continuing to fight for that freedom to keep the government out of homeschooling.
All right. It's good. It's really good. All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's really been a pleasure. Again, if you are not part of our Congressional Action Program, we'd love for you to apply to consider joining that. If you are not part of HSLDA Action, we'd very much like you to join as a member to be able to help continue to advance home education and its freedom on Capitol Hill. Generally speaking, we're a little odd when we walk into Capitol Hill because, as a rule, what we generally want is nothing. It's easier when the government doesn't meddle with it. But there are a few things that we work to try and prevent discrimination against homeschooling on, and there's plenty of stuff that can be very bad that we generally try and keep from interfering in, frankly, how you do what you do best, which is take care of and raise and educate your kids. So in that regard, if you're interested in partnering with us, please join us. You can find out more information about that at hsldaaction.org. Also, we'll be following up this presentation with an email with, I believe, a recording if we can make that work, but we'll certainly include the white papers we referenced here for information for you and a short survey so we can figure out how to serve and support you guys better, even and other resources you might be interested in. So with that, thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope you have a fabulous night.